So we now have a subject which is incredibly vital and is going to affect all of us in many different ways over the next few years. It is the future workspace. And we have actually a very impressive panel who in their different ways are responsible for thousands of people being healthy, productive in their workplaces. So in a sec, I'm going to invite them onto stage in order. They're each going to give a 5-slide presentation, which will last about 5 minutes, just to outline the subject from their perspectives. And then I'll moderate a discussion on stage, and we will have hopefully some time to take some questions from the floor. And there are some questions from leaders, I will add, who have been keen to get their views as well. So, in order, first up, if I could invite Anthony Henry to stage. Anthony's an interior designer with qualifications from the University of Technology in Sydney, the Royal College of Art in London. He's a division director and head of workplace design at Macquarie Group, and his numerous projects include number 1 Shelley Street, 28 Ropemaker Street, and 50 Martin Place. And prior to joining Macquarie in 2004, he was a founding partner of the design consultancy Future Space. Anthony Henry, everyone. To sit down. Okay, next up is Robbie Robertson. Robbie is a partner of experienced design at Deloitte Digital. 20 years of global experience working in the UK, Southeast Asia, and now Australia. He leads a multifunctional design team, including service design, VR, AR, visual, spatial, and narrative working, whatever that is, Robbie. Maybe we'll learn about that in a minute. With many clients, both in the public and private sectors, and he's also an avid supporter of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and he's a lead partner for Globe at Deloitte, which I'm sure he will explain as well in a sec. Robbie. Okay, Jennifer Saiz. Jennifer heads up the group property and security at Commonwealth Bank. She is responsible for the bank's workplace experience, which extends across the development of property strategies, leasing, transaction, and the creation of operation of workplaces, which includes security, business continuity, and crisis management. Sounds like she has her hands full. She leads a team of over 300 with responsibility for providing workplaces for more than 50,000 employees around Australia. And she led the development of the Commonwealth Bank Place, which is a state-of-the-art sustainable campus home to more than 6,000 Sydney employees. And currently, she's leading the development of a new major campus called Australian Technology Park, which will be home to 10,000 Sydney employees. Jennifer. Cameron Scott, his Chief Operating Officer for JLL's Asia Pacific Corporate Solutions business, which operates in 15 countries in the region. He's responsible for driving strategy, development, execution for the business, as well as HR, finance, legal, IT, and supply chain. Obviously, another busy man. And also responsible for JLL's real estate technology consulting business in the region, which is called Technology Solutions. Previously, he spent 8 years leading JLL's North Asia FM business, where he played a key role in building the FM business in Asia, which has grown to over 300 million square feet under management. Cameron. And lastly, but definitely not least, and up until a few minutes ago, he was the chairman of the CTBUH, but he's also an architect of innovative super tall towers and future cities. David Malott, founder and creative director of AI, a graduate of MIT. He synthesizes design with cutting-edge technologies such as computer vision, machine learning, and the Internet of Things to create the next generation of smart buildings. He was also formerly design principal at KPF, where, among other things, he led the design of the 600-meter tall Ping An Finance Center in Shenzhen, which some of us will have seen at the conference last year. David.
Good morning, everyone. It's awesome to be here, and let me say it's an honour to have an opportunity to share some of the experience that we've had as Macquarie in building workplace for people, a lot of which has been in tall buildings. As Steve mentioned, I work for Macquarie. We're a global organisation in financial services, and we have about 60 offices around the world. I guess there's two things that we really believe in when it comes to tenancy and comes to workspace. The first is that we believe that an environment has an impact on the way people think, feel and act. And in that, if you get it right, if you do have a positive impact, you have an impact on the way people operate as individuals, you have an impact on the way people operate as teams and as an organisation. And that's good for business. And the second thing that I wanted to say is that we are quite partial to hacking tall buildings. And at this point, I was thinking I might get a whole lot of people standing up outraged, but I don't. I have a benign face, so it's good. I'll go on then. So I thought I'd just tell you a little story this morning about how it is that we see buildings and workplace. And our story starts about 10 years ago when we had an opportunity to move our people down to number 1 Shelley Street, which is really just about 500 metres, I think, that way in Sydney. And it gave us an opportunity to think about a building quite differently. We had occupied a fairly traditional tower, a tall building with 2,700 high ceilings. I think they might even have been 2,600 high. And we had all of our people in that. Here we got an opportunity to think about a building in terms of urban planning. We thought about it in terms of flow, circulation, creating good public spaces, and public amenity. So we thought about sight lines, we thought about clean air, we thought about access to natural light. And it was transformational in the way we saw environments, and we had an opportunity to create something that really had a positive impact on our organisation. It also really encouraged us to think about how it was that we worked, and that sent us on a journey that took us to Interpolis in the Netherlands, where we found activity-based working, and we literally made the move from people sitting at desks all day to having choice to move all around the building and no one with a fixed desk. So that was a big step for us. We then had an opportunity to hack a high-rise in London, and we had 6 floors, about 20,000 square metres, and we took the principles that we'd learnt from number 1 Shelley Street. We thought about how is it that we can create a community in this building, and we weren't satisfied with just having 6 floors that were isolated from each other and connected only by a lift rise. And so we created a community around an atrium space. We symbolically put a red stair in the middle of it to symbolise what it is that we were trying to achieve in creating that community. And we thought really hard about the public spaces that sat around that, like places to eat, places to meet, gardens, access to terraces, those types of things. So again, applying urban principles to the way we thought about living in a high-rise building, creating community. We then got a chance to hack a heritage building, and I say that with total respect because we love this building. And I don't want to sound disrespectful about it. So this is a 10-storey building. It was a tall building when it was built in the 1920s, but not now. But this building had remarkable bones. So it was designed in 1925, and it had all the attributes of what we saw to be a great modern workplace. A central atrium that cut all the way through the middle of it that we were able to extend to bring natural light and air into the building. It had light on 3 sides. It had the ability to put a skylight over the top and a side core. So we had a big open floor plate with everybody connected. It was exactly what we were looking for. We experimented with the idea of functional inconvenience. So we really wanted to encourage in this building people to move around, taking our learnings from the rope maker building. And so we deliberately placed a little bit of tension in the space by putting things at slightly awkward locations to encourage people to go both up and down in the building and use the staircase as a circulation path. And the obvious benefit of that is that we get to bump into each other. We get to see people interacting. And we had a lot of skeptics when we started that job, but it's proven to be a place that has really brought the organisation together around that central atrium space. I also wanted to say that we really focused here too on creating community in terms of the events that we did. So we saw it not only as a piece of architecture, but as an ongoing curated space that required an active participation on the people who looked after it to encourage people to get together. And so we organised breakfast clubs, we organised a gardening collective, we have a choir, we have a music room. We do lots of things to bring it up. I can see time's up on mine, but unfortunately it's not on that one. So I've got one more slide. Bear with me, everybody. We've got purple to keep everybody awake. This is a hack on our headquarters. So when we moved most of the people up to 50 Martin Place, we still kept our number 1 Martin Place building. It had a dark side, and I'm not talking metaphorically. It literally did have one side that was completely lacking in any natural light. And having spent 10 years of my working life at Macquarie in that space, it was truly an energy-sapping experience. So we had an opportunity to cut, again, a stair, and you're kind of getting a theme, I guess, here, coloured stairs and openings in buildings, but we were trying to create here an innovation hub, a place where we could bring people together. It's largely an IT building, so it's got a real buzz to it around that. And again, we looked at how we created community around those spaces, places for people to eat, places for people to work quietly, places for people to stand up and interact in different ways. And that building has again been a place where we bring people together and we create community within our organisation. So 3 hacks: heritage, high-rise and headquarters. And I guess as a closing statement I'd say, and I'm reticent to use this, but Lance Armstrong he had an autobiography called It's Not About the Bike. I know that his brand's not fantastic anymore, but the name of his autobiography I think is awesome. I think it's not about the bike, it's not about the design, and it's not about the building. It's about the people that are in the building. And I think that it's a really, really important thing to think about that. It's amazing how many great projects start by talking about all the things that people don't care about. And in our business, we've been humbled by the feedback that we get, and we certainly have to concentrate hard on how it is that we create great workplaces in tall buildings.
I agree with Anthony. It is all about the people. And what I would like to do today is share with you some insights into 4 key things. First, about the new workforce. Imagine a place that we go to work where we're working alongside robots. Imagine a place where you're sitting next to somebody you've never met before and they've just flown in from the US. Imagine that half of your job has suddenly been taken away because of artificial intelligence. That world exists today. So what I want you to think about over the next 10, 15 minutes and 20 minutes we go through the Q&A session is, what does that then mean to the workplaces that we're designing? And I will hopefully, if I press this again, it will work. Nope, it doesn't. So the next thing I would like to talk about is technology. Technology is everywhere. It is a silent revolution that is changing the physical spaces that we work in every day. In the next 2 years, 20% and 50% of all Google searches will be done by voice. What does that mean for the workplace of the future? It means a lot of people will be talking to themselves. How do we design for that? We're also going to be infusing augmented reality. So the desktops will no longer be on our desks. We won't have computers. We won't have or need computers because we'll simply just pick up our phone or looking through our glasses and we'll see all the data that we need to be able to deliver and decipher and do the work that we need. But what does that actually then mean? Well, it means that 70% of us and our colleagues will be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information that is coming towards us every single day. It also is coupled with the fact that jobs that we know today will no longer, 50% of those jobs will no longer exist in 10 years' time. I look at my job, it didn't exist 2 years ago. I'm sure all of you can look at the organizations you work in and think about many jobs and roles that simply did not exist even a year ago. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that they're changing, but we're changing for the better. We're changing because we're going to be using those core skills of deciphering decision-making, of connecting with people, and actually leaving the boring stuff to the computers. There's two key things I also wanted to share with you around diversity and generational change. Diversity is really, really close to my heart. I sit in the D&I Council for Deloitte, and we look at and in trying to understand how do we encourage our religious, ethnicity, LGBTI communities to create and forge and have a safe place to come to work, to allow them to be authentic in what they do every single day, to allow them to be able to share their stories and have the courage to stand up in front of their colleagues and talk about who they are, who their partner is, who they're getting married to, hopefully, in the next few months. But we also want to talk about the generational change. I thought there was going to be at least 4 generations of our colleagues in the workplace. Actually, I think there's going to be 5. We talked about this. There's people from the early 20s through to the 70s and everything in between that is actually going to be in our physical workplaces. So how do we create and design environments that allow all of them to work collaboratively together and to be successful at what they do? So as we talk about this over the next 20 minutes, I want you to think about what does the future of work look like? How do we connect what we do in terms of work with our workforce to design our workplace to make sure that it is absolutely the best place and best thing we can do? Thank you.
And I'm going to focus on a large tenant's perspective on space. Just to provide context for the many international delegates, Commonwealth Bank is a large occupier of space. We occupy over 1 million square meters of space globally. We are a very active tenant. We take workplace really seriously. We see it as a competitive advantage, and we constantly evolve and challenge it. And so we've developed many large format workspaces, such as Commonwealth Bank Place at Darling Quarter, which is a 60,000 square meter development of 6,000 people, which Steve mentioned. We've just recently finished Commonwealth Bank Square as well in Darling Quarter. And now we're under our greatest challenge and our most significant opportunity with Australian Technology Park, which will see 10,000 of our employees coming together in 100,000 square meter campus development. And I'm slightly embarrassed to say in this forum of tall buildings that none of these workspaces are high-rise. That's not to say that large tenants are anti-high-rise, but there's a unique set of parameters that tall buildings need to respond to in order to meet the changing nature of work, which is quite dramatic. And for many reasons, it seems that large format campus-style developments seem to respond and facilitate these changes more rapidly. And so the starting point of defining what a tenant wants has to start with the workforce. And this technology revolution, and I don't think it's too dramatic to say, we're in the midst of a technology revolution, is impacting the workforce. And so the key things in terms of how we're seeing this manifest itself is that our workforce is becoming much more digitally savvy, much more globally connected, to the point that we get work done globally. It is less hierarchy, it's more informal, it's more focused on co-creation, it's increasingly based on freelance work, and there seems to be an ever-increasing premium on creative and innovative workforce. And so today I'm going to focus on 4 key themes that I think are shaping work and therefore shaping workspace, and how I think high-rise buildings and tall buildings can respond to these changes. So the first trend is radical mobility. This is a no-brainer. I'm sure most of you are working flexibly or your teams are working flexibly, but I must say that this is only the beginning, and this is going to grow exponentially. And it's not only about the fact that in order to retain and attract staff, you must be a flexible organization, but the fact that the economy itself is being underwritten by this freelance and share economy. And so therefore, you need to be flexible in order to embrace this change. And flexibility, by definition, is not just giving your employees or your partners the choice of working from home or working from the office, but in fact, it's the office itself that employees demand to have flexibility in. And so we must provide them with choices choices of different style of workspaces, whether it's private, focused workspace, or highly collaborative project-type spaces to support them in delivering their outcomes. And with this rise of mobility, collaboration becomes the reason that you come into the office. It is co-creation and creating output with your peers and your team is the driver. And so what we see going into the future is more collaboration rather than less. And so the experience at Commonwealth Bank is that in the last 2 years, we have increased our collaboration spaces by more than 25%. And that's both formal meetings and that's informal meeting spaces. And literally, we cannot keep up with the demand. It's that high. And so in a creative digital economy that's being underpinned by agile working, agile delivery methodology, and co-creation with huddles, scrums, VMBs, scrum of scrums, collaboration itself looks so much less structured. It's more about brainstorming, it's more about rolling up your sleeves and getting into it, and workshopping with teams and cross-partners to come up with solutions, rather than the board meeting. And so we think a lot about smart workplaces, and where I think building owners and engineers really think about smart workplaces in driving efficiency, we actually think about how do we enhance our employees' experience through technology? What are the invisible technologies that we can incorporate in workspaces that help our people navigate their work and navigate their life? And so things that we're piloting, for instance, at Commonwealth Bank Square, our newest building, is utilizing our mobile phone to access our buildings. So you swipe in and out via the mobile phone. Having a visitor app where you register your visitors on this app. When they enter, utilizing their phone again, you get a push notification telling you that they're there. And you get the same notification when they leave. Utilizing the phone to be able to find people, connect with people, to be able to book meeting spaces, to be able to report property faults, things that make work easier. And then in terms of life, making life easier, we're looking at organizing via our app as well, the ability to order food so that our people can take dinner home with them on the way out of the building. So it's really taking a human-centered approach to the design of technology to simplify life. And then it's this rise of the workplace experience, which has become really popular through the WeWork model. And it's an acknowledgement that workplace in itself, the design of space in itself, is not enough. And that given a very transient population, you need to consider the experiences that are curated within the space. What is the social agenda within the space that is being supported? And so the implications for tall buildings, I'll be really quick and logical. I'm an engineer, so I'll try to be to the point. The first one is, given the rise of mobility, it means that when our employees are in the office, which will be less frequent, they need to feel connected to the organization, visually connected to the organization. And so what I mean by that is that last week, for instance, we had an innovation forum at Commonwealth Bank Place, which was held at the base of an atrium. That building has about 3,000 people in it. Standing on one of the levels and looking down, I could see that the 3,000 employees that were working in that building felt connected to what was happening there. Looking across, I could see technology teams working in scrums. I could look up and see that the retail team was working on a product release. I could look across and see the marketing team working in the hub. So without even trying, I could get a sense for what was happening in the organization. And so the question for tall buildings is, how do you create the atrium and plaza level equivalent? And what value are you placing on that? Because actually tenants place a large, large value on that. The second thing is, with the rise of this flexible working and this increase in collaboration, it actually means that we probably have to consider the design density benchmarks for buildings. And that is because actually more space is being allocated to collaboration space. Less space is being allocated now in the future working to where workstations go, but it's the same number of workstations. And so we need to consider the design densities, the outside air provisions, the vertical transportation strategies for these buildings so that they are as effective as low-rise buildings. And one thing that really matters to tenants, which everyone here knows, is the floor plate size, shape, its orientation, side core versus central core. These things significantly improve the quality of workspace and the connectivity that buildings offer. And then there is the ground plane dilemma of tall buildings. How can we shift from the grand foyer, that gesture, and shift it to more of a destination that is packed with work functionality, where employees and tenants see it as an extension of their workspaces, and it really becomes a place where the community, the building community, feels like there is a sense of identity. And then finally, the WeWork community management model, which is very strong in creating a social agenda for a disparate group of occupiers. Is that something that should be considered to create a brand and identity in tall buildings? And so, my view is that the role of tall buildings is a vital one in the urban context. And by focusing on the employee experience and human-centered approach to the design and operations of tall buildings will evolve and respond to what is a very dramatic change in the way that we're working. Thank you.
JLL's corporate solutions business is providing real estate services, outsourced real estate services to clients around the world, and we have hundreds of clients. And we are in the very privileged position of learning from those clients. And I can tell you that there's a huge amount of activity going on around workplace and workplace change across that client base. But I just want to start off by sharing a perspective with you on convergence. So what we're seeing is convergence of interests between corporate occupiers on one hand and investors and owners on the other hand. So what are those areas of interest? Well, both are interested in customer experience. Both are interested in Internet of Things. Both are interested in sustainability. So there's a lot of common interest between owners and occupiers. Their fundamental business drivers, though, are different. So obviously the owner and the investor wants to get a return on their asset. And traditionally we've heard that the corporate occupier wants a place to do business. But I can tell you now that that's changed a lot now. So the corporate occupier wants more than that. They want their workplace to help them achieve their corporate objectives. Could be talent retention and attraction. Could be productivity. So a good way, I think, for the tall building community to think about corporate occupiers is they want their workplace to help them meet objectives. So change is the only constant. If that's such a truism, it's ever more today. And Robbie talked about technology. So technology, we need to remember there's no intrinsic value in technology. Technology is an enabler, and we're seeing it everywhere. So we see robots, we see AI, we see drones, Internet of Things, all of these things happening, sensors, all happening at the one time, apps everywhere. But these are the enablers that we need, that are helping and driving change. And the way people are working is changing and has changed. So here's an example up on the screen there of JLL's Shanghai office, where we have a 15-minute room. No chairs. You have to get your meeting done in 15 minutes and you're out. So employees are thinking about not just what do I do next, but where do I do it to get that task done effectively. And then we're all operating in a pretty uncertain world. Brexit, etc. We saw the impact on the UK property markets of Brexit. So I hope you are interested, and I think we'll hear when we get into the panel discussion, a set of occupier themes. And we've heard about some of them already. So let me briefly touch on each. This whole diversity of spaces, different places to work. seeing a lot of that. Workplace is an experience, and Jennifer talked about WeWork. So what we're seeing is, what are corporates doing? They're actually taking part of their portfolio and saying, let's go flexible. Let's see where that takes us. And so where that's going to end up, no one quite knows, perhaps. Could be 10%, could be 15%, could be 20% of the portfolio, but it's definitely happening. Wellness is another one, and we're having this conference here in Australia. Wellness is huge in Australia and huge in the workplace. And it's something that, it's not about putting a gym in. It's more than that. It's really a much more holistic view around employee well-being and employee wellness. So some people are predicting that's the next $1 trillion industry. Digitisation, technology, apps everywhere, as I mentioned, and some of that technology is helping optimise service delivery, and it's helping personalised experience in the workplace. So the data there is now to record what temperature I like to have in a room, what level of lighting I like to have in a room. So when I walk into that meeting room, the building will, and the workplace will adjust to accommodate that. Human experience, we heard about that a little bit earlier as well. So human experience really is, in the workplace, is a subset of something that's happening more broadly in society, which is that people want to consume experiences over assets. They want to pay for that, and they're prepared to pay for that. In the workplace, it really manifests itself around, and this is what our research shows, engagement, empowerment, and fulfillment. So if you can provide a workplace that gives those things to employees, you're going to have happier employees, and you're going to have more productive employees. Why is innovation and collaboration important? We heard from Jennifer that at CommBank, I think the collaborative spaces have gone up 25%, she said. This is really about speed to market. To get to market quickly and to compete, you have to be able to innovate, and you have to be able to collaborate to do that. You have to be able to collaborate in your own organisation, and you have to be able to collaborate with others. So whether they're tech startups or others, and not every organisation can do everything. So you have to co-create, and you do that through collaboration. And then the last one there around talent, attraction and attention is a key one for corporate occupiers. So to deal with all of this, what's happening and what's changing in workplace, JLL has come up with the future of work. And the future of work has these 5 dimensions that you see on the right-hand side there. So the 2 bottom ones, financial performance and operational excellence, they've been things that corporations have wanted for a long time. They want to save money, and they want to have consistent service, high-quality service. But now we're going beyond that. Corporations are now interested in human experience. They're interested because they want to attract and retain talent. They're interested because they want to increase the productivity of their employees. And the need to collaborate and innovate, as I mentioned, is another emerging area. And the digital piece, the digital drive, is what's enabling it all to happen. So I look forward to an engaging panel session. Thank you.
In all my time at CTBUH and coming to these conferences, this might be the first time to hear directly from the users of the space. Okay, and Anthony, you're welcome to hack the tall building, and we should all hack the tall building, because frankly, the tall building is crap for collaboration. Now that I'm not chair, I'm a bit more free to say that, right? But I believe there's potential if we can leverage design and technology to solve these problems. Now, at a personal level, I left the ivory tower of KPF and walked down the street and into a tech hub. Okay? And why a tech hub? And it's because I believe that the future for architects is to become more technological. So right now, architecture is perceived very much as a kind of art form, but at AI, we're pursuing it as a technology. Okay? Because there is this thing called the convergence, right? And if you went downstairs, there's a great session on smart buildings, and you can hear about sensors. We now have people like IBM and Microsoft presenting at our conferences, talking about the cloud and AI. So we have this very enhanced technological capabilities, And on the other hand, we have these social drivers, economic drivers, which are really changing the formula, the sharing economy, okay, and the future workplace. And so I think now the primary metric for building and designing the tall building shouldn't be efficiency, it should be replaced by experience. So as an architect and a designer, what does this mean? So technology provides us with new building material, okay, building blocks, digital building blocks. We're looking at a slide. These are Intel drones, right? So individual pixels that can be programmed to move around space. So technology enables new ways to create. It also enables new ways to interact with the building. And I think very importantly opens up the possibility that space can be more responsive, okay? That it is more attuned to what the users are doing inside, and it can adapt. I've seen this trend happen, and while these 3 projects, which I worked on, were kind of incremental advances in engineering and in height, what was happening on the inside with the technology was exponential. So Shanghai World Financial Center had almost nothing in terms of what we now know as IoT. ICC, I think, took a great step forward, where the whole building had a sensing mechanism to optimize lighting controls and energy use in the building. And with the Ping An Finance Center, a whole array of sensors which were embedded into the structure to monitor the movement and the health of the structure, to predict and prevent things before they might happen, to make the tower safe. Okay, so the question is, moving forward, how do we redesign tall buildings in a way that Anthony doesn't have to hack them as much, so we'll pre-hack them, right? And I fundamentally believe that the vertical format is something that we need because we need the density. Okay, we can't replace the density, but at the same time, the center core office tower is very, very bad. Okay, in terms of line of sight, in terms of human interaction, the floors create silos. So looking at a hybrid model, and this is a project in very early stages we're exploring with Ping An, where we have both the density, but then distributing some of that area into a horizontal format. So it's something that we're talking to with clients to sort of say take 15 to 30% of the tower. Let us do something different with that. With Ping An, it's a little bit easier because they use a lot of their towers themselves, so we can design it from that perspective. But fundamentally, to break out of this sort of singular mold, the vertical mold, and into a hybrid model. Okay, and then the future workplace starts to look like this, right? Where you get sensing, you get computer vision, and we can design this space to be more legible, okay, by that technology. So sometimes technology needs to be assisted by a change in the physical configuration of space. So by moving more of that activity out into the common area, computers can sense how people are using the space. We can also begin to monetize space differently. Maybe instead of even monthly rents per desk, you begin to sort of rent in micro units, right? Once you understand where the people are. And it's very interesting because the kind of space which is conducive for technology and the computer to read is actually also the kind of space which is good for us, right? It's something that's more collaborative and more fun. So, thank you.
Thank you all. And over those 25 slides, I think a lot of thought-provoking material, and it's difficult to know where to start. David, on your quote of the conference so far, I'm going to come back to you on that later, but I'm not going to start there. I'd actually, first of all, like to clear up the question of millennials, because we keep hearing that, you know, with their need for instant gratification and a purpose in life and at work, that, you know, that's a real challenge for them, not only in their social lives, but in their daily working lives. Robbie, you touched upon this. How can the workspace and the tall building in particular help the organisation to enthuse and develop these people?
So I think it's not just about the millennials. They're going to be 60% of the workforce in the next couple of years. It's about that 5 generations that I talked about in my presentation. It's about how do we collaborate to create a culture where the millennial workforce, which as you rightly mentioned there, they live in an instant gratification world, and through no fault of their own, they have been brought up with technology at their fingertips every single day. They have been brought up in an Instagram, Facebook world. And how do we then translate that so that world that they live in every day into the workplace? And that's what we're seeing. And it was great to see everyone, there's a real synergy around all the presentations, around that fusion of technology into the workplace to create those flexible spaces and using human-centered design to think about and stand in the shoes of our colleagues and employees to go, well, what does their world look like? And how do we help them, empower them to deliver to their best potential? And that's what I want to talk about. And it was for millennials, they have been in this world where this agile way of working, this instant, this supercharged, fast community that they work in has actually translated into what we're seeing with agile scrums, et cetera, that Jem mentioned. And that's now permeating throughout all of the different generations. So I actually think, we used to chastise, we used to talk about, the millennials. Actually, I think that they're actually fundamentally changing the way that we look at designing physical spaces in a good way. So I think it's good.
So Jennifer, I mean, as Robbie said, it's not just about millennials, and I guess at Commonwealth Bank, like most other organisations, there's a wider worker profile. How do you...
I mean, I think for us, and also, again, for international delegates, for them to get context, like the Australian workforce or workplace has greatly shifted to activity-based working. And so what that does is provide a great amount of choice for employees and teams to choose how to work, in a way that is much more effective for them. And so in providing that choice, you're not pigeonholed by one way of working or one style of working. And so, it suits a much wider range of people, a much wider range of working, which, the old traditional offices where you were tied to a specific desk didn't actually give you those opportunities. And so, specifically from a millennial perspective, like there are opportunities in working in, large atrium buildings that is underpinned by activity-based working. Your bump factor, your ability to feel very connected to the organization, your ability to participate in scrums and be, widely known is much greater. And so actually this shift in way of working, supports them.
David, how can technology help in all this?
Well, I think we're like far beyond sort of lamenting how so much of people's social lives has moved online. It's just a part of reality. And I think it's actually a nice reality because it enables us to have a much farther social reach and to meet people we may have never met before and to maintain relationships despite distances. So it can be a good thing. But I think what we should look at doing is trying not to fight that, but to pull that experience off the phone and begin to actually bring it into physical space. And so how do we actually redesign our buildings, whether it's projections or adaptations, to bring that whole social structure offline and then back to the real world?
Anthony?
Yeah, I was listening to that comment and I was thinking, in some ways the screen's like the scourge of the office, in so much that you get caught with it at the desktop and it sort of then creates these big barriers that go across and it's a kind of impossible thing to get rid of. And then and you see people walking around offices looking at their iPhones, like everyone stands in the lift, which is like, and they know they're all part of the same organisation, so they know that they're not like probably crazy people because they've come through security turnstiles to get in the building. But they still all look down at their phone. And I think one of our big things is that we're really trying to create something that probably goes back a long way in terms of the social kind of dynamic that you want to exist in a space. And, people come to work, like the big migration in the world is from country to city, and people come into cities as millennials to be part of the scene, to be with people that are interesting and that are doing interesting things and are on the cutting edge and doing all that stuff. And so an office is just a part of that city experience. And I think that we've probably got a more fundamental approach in terms of what we think we can do from a space point of view. I'd say, where it comes to technology, when you want technology to do things like give you better quality air, to have circadian rhythm in your lighting, those types of things, because that affects everybody, right? Whether you're a millennial or a 60-year-old who just wants to retire. So I'm not saying that I'm a 60-year-old.
You're saying
Still
I
got
am.
a little way to go. Yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing, the whole technology.
I think we'll come back to technology, but Cameron, you mentioned the human experience, and I'm presuming that means more than beanbags and slides and that sort of thing. What does it mean, and how can a tool building provide a human experience?
Well, I think it's quite a broad topic. I mentioned before about the fact that the research shows that what employees are looking for most broadly is to be engaged in the workplace, to be fulfilled in the workplace and be empowered, for example, as Jennifer's saying, to be able to work where they'd like to work. So I think human experience is a broad thing. It goes well beyond the workplace as well. I think to take a holistic approach is the right way to go with human experience, and just going back to that different generations in the workplace is that I absolutely agree. I don't know why there's so much focus on the millennials. We know they're digital natives. We know they can. We know what their skill sets are. But I think if you focus on that individual group and for example, give that group a particular human experience, you might find that you're effectively isolating or identifying separations between the different generations. So that's why it needs to be a holistic approach around workplace experience. You've got to think about all of those generations when you're thinking about how to design and operate your workplace. And as has already been mentioned, I think human-centered design is a really important aspect to that.
Anthony, you showed some fantastic images there of some Macquarie Group spaces, which I'm sure have a very positive impact on people, but how do you measure that?
That's a good question. This is like the Holy Grail, and I'm just going to answer it in one sentence. No, I'm not. I think that, we obviously put a value on it, and I'd say a lot of it is based on both pre and post occupancy feedback that we get, and then anecdotal feedback. So, we know, for instance, that when we moved into Shelley Street, 93% of people said they didn't want to go back to their old way of working. So, to my mind, that's a really positive endorsement. And we often ask the question, does the workplace that you're in now support you in terms of getting work done, being productive? And we see really positive results in the answering of that question. So that, to me, says that the workplace is, because if you think about it, workplace can do everything in its possible powers to stop you from getting work done, because you've got barriers, you've got doors, you can't get in here, you can't do that, you've got a screen that you can't see anybody. So we're all about removing those barriers to let people get work done. And then, we hear it in our people and in the stories that they tell. It's become part of the culture of who we are. And we have fantastic endorsement from the most senior parts of our organisation down. And that's based on the experience of what those workplaces deliver. Because if it didn't work, we wouldn't continue to invest in it as an organisation. It wouldn't be something that would be important to us, I don't think.
Jennifer, do you measure? What metrics do you use?
Yeah, we do the same thing in terms of pre and post move surveys, and now we're shifting and utilizing the Leesman survey every year so that we can get a really clear benchmark in terms of how we're performing. I would say that as you walk into our new workspaces, you just feel it. You just absolutely know the level of collaboration, the energy levels there, the people that you're bumping into that you'd otherwise not be able to see in a traditional ivory tower central core building, it's profound. And there is a value to an organization, especially a large organization, where actually to get work done, you need to work across businesses, across teams. It simplifies it. It simplifies it quite significantly.
Right, David. Tall buildings are crap for collaboration. What are they good for?
Well, fundamentally, we do need the density.
You do.
I think it's not right to sort of prohibit everyone from participating in that urban experience. I think there is an energy to the city. It's where we want to be. I think we see that as a trend around the world. Okay, and so we need that density, but maybe the tall building isn't the only form that can provide urban density, and so we should be looking at other forms, right? Other models of urban habitats, which provide density. So I think that example which I showed, and there's those other fascinating projects I've seen in Germany that were built very long time ago, but they built it over the Autobahn. They're actually building buildings on top of roads, and being more inventive about the way that we build. But I think very, very importantly to understand that the product that we're delivering today is not the product that's wanted now. And so we should all leave today like just ready to design something else.
And I didn't mean for the presentation to sound like it was anti-tall buildings for large tenants. And I think that there are absolutely things that designers and owners of tall buildings can do to make them more attractive to large tenants. And so, consider the size of the floor plate. Consider inclusions of atriums not being an optional extra, for tenants. Place the value in that, and place the value in that upfront so that it's not so difficult to hack later, as Anthony was mentioning before. Consider the ground plane. So if you are limited from a high-rise perspective, what functionality can you add to that ground floor plane so that it does become a destination for the tenants within the building, so they feel like it's an extension of their workspace? Maybe that then replaces the atrium of, large campus-style developments. So I think that there is massive opportunities. It's just, taking it on so that, we're not left with stock that is not meaningful or interesting for large tenants.
Well, I should be fair and ask you all the same question, Cameron.
Well, of course, in some, if you take places where land is scarce, like Singapore and Hong Kong, there's no choice. So that's where we're seeing quite a lot of innovation. There's a Singaporean bank that is using workplace to change culture. So that, like many banks, is getting digitally disrupted, and it's asking its real estate function to help manage that and respond to that through the workplace and to change culture. So that organisation's introduced agile thinking, human-centred design into the workplace, and it's got a dramatically physically different workplace than you might see in a typical vertical high-rise. So staircase all the way through the tenancy, lots of different spaces, and not necessarily trying to make it all look glamorous and flash, but really to try out, let's have a space to try and improve creativity, collaboration, or whatever it is. So I guess necessity is the mother of invention in that case. So we don't always have a choice. But I do agree with the general point that tall buildings do have to, the designers of tall buildings do need to be across where these big tenants or corporate occupiers really want to go, because whilst it's been changing quickly for some time, it's changing even more quickly now, particularly around this flexible workspace.
So, Robbie, do you agree with that?
Yeah, listen, I've been working with a company in Thailand, one of the banks in Thailand, and they got a lot of tall building, and they wanted to go, well, how do we get our colleagues to have those bump moments? How do we actually get them to connect more? And what we've done is actually flipped it to created a learning organization where we've developed these spaces on every single floor, which actually encourages people from different departments to come and to learn about what each other are doing. How do we learn about new technology as it's being integrated into the organization so they're not afraid of it anymore? And then to turn those into stories and to use narrative and storytelling to create moments where they can actually share and demystify what they're actually learning and take away that fear factor, and actually then encourage them to actually come back and go, actually, that was fun. I enjoyed that. I want to come and learn more. So by creating those learning spaces, we're creating this vertical learning village across the 10 floors. And when we started to, we developed it last year, and we're starting to see the implications of that now. And the transformation in the comments that we're getting when they first started was, oh, I don't know what it's going to be, to, I want to go there every single day and learn. And that is, I think, hopefully successful integration of human-centered design, storytelling, and learning to change the way that we look at the use of that physical space.
So everything you've all spoken about and all the images we've seen suggest very open, porous spaces. I know we've got a question about this actually, so I'm going to give Adrian Betanzos a chance to ask his question about this very subject.
We keep on hearing the same thing of everybody wants a collaborative, more open workspaces, but at the same time we hear that the background noise, it's something that nobody likes. So instead of being collaborative and open, people start hiding within their headphones, earpods, or going to even noisier spaces like coffee shops just to hide a little bit from the working space to be, according to them, more productive. So they're a little bit contradictory. So in your experience, is this something that sounds familiar to you? And how can we create something more collaborative yet personal?
Okay, so open plan spaces encourage collaboration, but they create noise which can be disruptive. Anthony, how do you deal with that?
So as an example of that, we do get that feedback a lot, so I totally concur, and I think there's an interesting dynamic that exists between people that are extroverted and introverted, and some people, just want to talk all the time in the office and they drive you crazy, and then other people want to be quiet. So one of the ways that we've dealt with that is in our #1 Martin Place building, which was the purple staircase building. What we did was we have a flexible model there, so people are free to move around. They have choice, so they can go where they need to go, and that could be a coffee shop on the street, or it could be at home, or it could be somewhere else in the building. You're not shackled to your desk. I think that's a really important kind of point you've got to get across, right? And it's a big paradigm shift for a lot of organisations. People love their pedestals, and we had a pedestal action group that really got very passionate about keeping their pedestals in the building. These are the things you have to deal with when you're in workplace, and worse. Now I've lost my thought. But no, what we did was we did create a library area. So we thought, well, what's a place where people do work quietly? And we came up with the idea of a library, which is a pretty earth-shattering concept. And we put it in an area that was on the dark side of the building. People don't mind that because it's kind of creating a different atmosphere. And if you go there on any given day, you will see people who have escaped their kind of team dynamic environment, and they're sitting there quietly doing their work. So I think it's an easy fix, and it's really something that's always existed in any good community. There are quiet places and loud places. As I say, I think the thing people get stuck with is that when you're in your office, you're stuck at your desk, and if you can get your head around not being at your desk, then you can start to do lots of pretty interesting things.
Yeah, I think it's all the traditional workspace where people were tied to their specific desk. Absolutely, the acoustics, and you can't really choose your neighbor at that point, become an issue. But in well-designed activity-based working spaces that have concentrated focus spaces on a typical floor, concentrated focus spaces on plaza levels that everyone in the building has access to, ensure that if you need to get stuff done, you will get stuff done.
We've actually implemented an app in the Edge building in Amsterdam, which actually connects to your calendar and then helps you to find the space that is appropriate for what you're doing that day. So if you've got a collaborative working team in the morning, it will guide you to the space where that you're allowed to do that and are not going to upset other people around you. And if you need to have that quiet space to finish a document or make calls, it will then steer you to those different locations, so that it's actually working with you and creating individual patterns or places and giving you recommendations of where you should go. So that's I think great idea of using activity-based working, but supplementing it with technology to for you then to be able to work at your optimal best.
Mm-hmm. Cameron? Does everyone want open plan spaces, or do some people still want an office?
Well, I very much agree with what's been said. The way that we've dealt with that particular issue is through hush rooms. So hush room, a two-person hush room, not one of these phone box things, which I think is not a very pleasant environment to be in, but a two-person hush room, you have enough in the environment so you can go there for a meeting, get on a phone call, you can go there, or you can go there to do project or do individual work. So it's quiet. So first of all, you've got to start with activity-based working principles. So when someone joins JLL, they get a locker. They don't get a desk. That's it. A locker's to where you put your work stuff, and it has to go back at the end of the day, and a laptop. Yeah. So the hush room, providing that hush room as a place to work is an important way of addressing it. So you've got to make sure you've got those different workspaces, as people have been saying, so that don't get that frustration. Are we going back to offices? Absolutely not. I just can't see organisations going back to that, because they'll find if you go back to that, that communication will diminish. You won't be able to move as fast as an organisation, and you'll very quickly say that's not a good idea.
Mm-hmm. David?
Yeah, and at the building scale, we need to do a better job at providing more variety of space. That's sort of conducive to these different kinds of activities. I think tall buildings tend to be extremely repetitive because it's easier to design, easier to build, and easier to let, okay? And actually, I think it's that last perspective that comes from the owner, that it's easier for them to lease towers which are quite homogeneous is the greatest hindrance. I think architects would love to design buildings which have more variety. I think a lot of the presentations that you've seen begin to inject that kind of variety, whether the floor plates shift or transform, introducing those public spaces. And so I think that's what we need to do, is to provide that infrastructure that then is more synergistic with how that space will be used.
I am seeing that increasingly the trend is going for a connected spaces, and you rightly shown that. Specifically when it comes to tall building, what are the kind of analysis you do for the smoke management, the risk management, and also the energy management before acquiring these properties? I'm asking this with context of tall buildings, and she rightly said there are challenges, and I see this as one of the biggest threat on tall buildings. As an engineer, as a fire engineer, what are those things you do prior to acquiring these spaces? Because all your slides I saw, wonderful slides. So what are those precautions you are taking for energy and the smoke evacuation and threat analysis? World has seen recent fire in London, but fortunately we have not witnessed a fire in an occupied atrium space, which can be a big threat for anybody. So what are those things you are taking care of?
So the technical challenges of creating collaborative spaces and opening up spaces between floors, presumably, not least fire compartmentation.
So this is definitely something that we've had long conversations about, and it's true that, once you get past compartmentalisation of, I think, three floors in Australia, you start to run into some really interesting challenges around how that all works. We don't give up at that point, so we do really look for solutions, and we've been successful in that. So if you take something like 50 Martin Place, which is 10 floors that are connected, it's got smoke curtains that drop down all around the balustrading, so the whole internal space becomes effectively a flue for the smoke to escape, and it has a staggered way of falling to allow for the exiting of people. I mean, it's got a consequence, because if you burn toast on level 2, everybody in the building knows that you've burnt the toast.
Yes.
Because you suddenly start going to evac and everybody's standing on the balconies and wondering what's going on. So there's no question that you've got to start thinking about some of the operational implications and really try and get people not to burn the toast. It is a real challenge. And a lot of building owners, we find, don't really have the stomach for that kind of interruption or hacking of buildings. They'd much rather keep them like that. But there are solutions we've found to the challenge of doing that. And it's a very astute observation around the challenge.
It's a revolution. and I worry a little bit about revolutions because they're quite dangerous. And I just wonder, with flexible working, with the potential that some industries will completely change very rapidly in the next few years, what do you think it will do to demand? Will it 5 years, 10 years, will it keep going up? Will it drop? Or will it be incredibly volatile?
I'm happy to have a go at that one. So I think so we're definitely seeing it, and I think you're acknowledging that companies testing out that whole flexible work concept. I guess in the end of the day, no one knows how far that it's going to go, but if it does get as more established as a way of sourcing space, then we're going to see changes to the business models that operate. So, forward valuations could turn into valuations based on profitability, for example. It's been generated out of workplace as a service. So, are we on the cusp of that? Or are we at a Netflix blockbuster moment around that? It's very hard to tell, and I think it's not necessarily an easy thing for a corporation to implement, but it's definitely happening, and it's definitely something to be thinking about what the implications are in terms of how the space gets offered, what is the business model around it, and then how deep is it really going to go, and how is it going to be is it going to become the way of sourcing space? That's the ultimate question, I guess.
Well, I think just to go back to that original question, the shift to flexibility or activity-based working, has it impacted our ongoing demand? Not really, because in fact what we have found is that we are much more productive and innovative organization working in a new way. And so we have been able to maintain and extend our lead from a digital competitive advantage. And so, in fact, with that increased demand, means that, we've needed to grow. And so, I think that in the Australian context, we haven't really seen a reduction of space requirements. And we've been, 6 years, 7 years on the activity-based working journey. And so, the impact hasn't been one where there's this shrinking demand in terms of, CBD space. In fact, quite the opposite is what's occurring.
We've got another question here.
Good morning, Abbas Amin Masur, and I profess at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Thank you very much for all the wonderful presentations this morning. We heard words like hacking, revolutionary, crap, and so forth, which in my view sort of express our begging, the workspace begging for change, which is very appropriate, I think. But that is in response to the expectations of the workforce. That's why we're making these changes, or we're concerned, we're talking about the issue. My question is, what do we do, or do we know enough about the expectations of future workforce so that we can be proactive and maybe even give direction to how we work rather than being reactive?
Well, I think, what I think is that this is just the beginning. And so, as flexibility is the way of increases as a way of working, and it's accepted more in Australia and probably globally, then we are going to see this change in terms of we're going to continue to see this change in terms of what it means to work. And so what it means to work is to connect with your team, and this team is becoming increasingly globally. So it's about considering the spaces that you're putting in so that people can have the human connection and the human collaboration within the workspace, but also how do they seamlessly connect visually with wherever else in the world they need to connect to deliver whatever work it is. And we're just at the beginning. And so it is going to amplify. And so this requirement for buildings to support collaboration, to support flexible working is paramount, because it is just going to continue. And so in 2 years, we increased collaboration space by 25%. what is the future? It's going to be a workspace that is much more focused on collaboration as a way of doing work.
Robbie, the workforce of the future, how can we begin to predict what they want?
Well, a lot of work that we're doing at Deloitte is actually combining our teams from our training teams, our education teams, our human specialists, human capital teams, our spatial design and strategy teams together to go, how do we create proof of concepts for our clients or for industries to start to answer those questions and to start to look at those results and go, what does 5 years look like? If we were to integrate augmented reality into the workplace, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for our workers who are locked into a desk or who are accountants who are sitting in front of a computer every single day? If we start looking at cognitive working or taking AI and actually taking away 50% of what they do every day, does that then free them up to think about what they're doing and look at the implications and the insights of what they're delivering? That then changes what adds a lot of value to what they do. It makes the individuals more purpose-led and are far more encouraged to actually think about and to do a lot greater, better work. But it also starts to understand. We start looking at those proof of concepts and going, well, what does that mean when we industrialize that across either the entire organization or across an entire industry sector? And that so yes, there is a revolution, but I think we all are by having these conversations that we're having today, by all looking at what the implications that are, we are actually creating much better and far more valuable opportunities for the future, and I think that's exciting.
I think it's a really interesting question about where the future comes from. For me, I always think that working in an interesting organisation, which I have the privilege of doing, you're part of a social lab, right? And it's got lots of inputs that are immediately in your vicinity that are challenging the way you think about things. And I think that one of the big issues with anything is that you have a mindset that doesn't enable you to react to that. And I would say, we are always having the business say to us, how could we do this better? Or how might we do that? Like our trading business now is a genuine global business, right? And I still think that we're struggling to solve that problem for them because I still think they're frustrated by the quality of the sound. The systems that they use are too, I won't swear, but they're too hard to use. They never ever work. You always have that 10 minutes to get onto the bloody WebEx, Ooh, I hope no one from WebEx is here. So you've always got that. So I think there's always an opportunity to be listening to the business and responding to their requirements. And I think the other thing from my perspective is that, and we've done a lot of design thinking over the last couple of years, and I know it's a buzzword, but we've done it. And you've always got to go back and ask the questions around how might you do something, right? And usually it's in really basic things, like the transition points in buildings, like how do I stop having to use my card to have to get into the building, which is a problem or whatever. So I do think that you've got an opportunity to build a future by being iterative and hacking, but not at a kind of like your transformational, 15-year cycle or a 50-year cycle. You've got to do it kind of iteratively all the time. And it's just a different type of metabolism and a different way of approaching property. And the problem with property in some ways is that you build a building and you're stuck with it, right? Because you can't it's just made out of concrete. And it's got floors and ceilings, and that's not the way the world works, right? Because the iterations need to happen every 6 months, every 3 months, every 2 months. And there's always opportunity to do that. And so that's what makes the built environment such an exciting place to work, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a social lab that is continually being asked to be changed.
A two-part question. People worry that robots will take their place at some point in the future. But something like 40% of the jobs that were around in the 1970s no longer exist. What are your views on how this will pan out and how our workspaces will change? With a reference to the high-rise workspace too, please. Also, how do you anticipate the probable increase in autonomous and flying vehicles that will affect high-rise workplace design in the future? Thank you.
Wow. Robots and flying vehicles.
Sounds like Blade Runner, doesn't it?
It does sound like Blade Runner, but No doubt it'll be. David, this is your territory, surely.
So we are thinking about it. And I participated in a hackathon with Kone in Shenzhen, where you got teams of Chinese hackers. And one of the teams, their demo was actually guiding the robot into the elevator, right? Because that might very well become part of the future, right? So they solved it technologically. I asked the question to the team, though, how would the human being respond when they get out of the elevator and see the little robot on the floor? How do you make sure you don't step on it, right? So it opens up different social dynamics. But I've also talked with Kone about, can we fly drones through elevator shafts, because not all the space in the shaft is being utilized. You know? Things like this. So how do we redesign buildings for technologies that are here today, right? And then thinking about the technology which is sort of looming over everyone's head, which the question alluded to, which is AI, right? And for me, AI right now is a bit like the Wizard of Oz. No one's really sure if it's real or if it's a lot of fluff, but I think it is real, right? And I think it's actually going to be as disruptive as the steam engine was. So the computer was not a disruption, it was an enabler, right? I think, but AI will displace millions and millions of jobs, okay? Not just hundreds of thousands of jobs. And so we have to evolve, okay? But it's not all gloom and doom, right? If you've heard of Elon Musk speak, right? Because I think with AI and what's going to happen is the more and more data that gets poured into it, the more it's going to sort of find the average, or find the optimization. And so the analogy I like to use, and my friend told me this, is that Starbucks, okay? So Starbucks has like averaged out the world's coffee. In some places, like in the States, it made it better. In some places, it made it worse, right? But in Australia, there is no Starbucks. And that's why I can come to Australia and have a very good cup of coffee. So I think the jobs of the future are going to be the ones that are the anomalies. Our role as humanity is to be the anomaly, right? It's to not be the average. And so it's going to go from manufacturing to services, and then services to experiences.
Okay. Let me just add quickly to that. A bit of work that McKinsey has done recently didn't focus on job losses, it focused on tasks within jobs, and actually came up with a ranking across many countries of the world of the extent to which people's jobs tasks would be automated by AI. And I can tell you this AI is happening. If you think about tasks that are undertaken in the workplace or in a service centre, they're still very manual in many cases, so it's just automating those tasks, very simple. So the job will change. There probably will be some losses of jobs as well, but I think it's really more around the job changing. And then I think someone made the point earlier, I think it was you, Robbie, that the job will change and it can become a better quality job. So by freeing myself up from all of those routine tasks that now got automated, I can think a little bit more strategically. I've got a bit of time to step back and think about what I'm doing as opposed to doing the doing. So I think that's a different way, a little bit of a different way of looking at it. It's perfectly understandable that it's creating some anxiety, and there's a huge amount of talk and discussion about it, for sure.
And I think that considering then what the impact is associated with artificial intelligence and then the work that remains, it just goes back to the previous question, which is, how far is this going to go? Well, it seems like it's actually going to go really far, because then the nature of the work that remains is really going to be experience-based, creative-based, in this lens of innovation, which means that collaboration, connectivity actually becomes more and more important.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the two countries that are least ready for AI or the impact of AI are China and India, because they are massive workforces. So the impact of AI is likely to be high in those particular countries, and so they probably need to start thinking about and getting ready for that.
One of you was telling me, I can't remember who it was, yesterday, that robots are already in the workplace. Who was that?
Well, JLL has a robot as a receptionist here in Sydney. In fact, I think it's on display in the exhibition area.
Okay.
That robot's name is Jill, and so Jill will interact with you when you come into the workplace. It will email someone, let that person know, or message them that you're there. It will ask you what it is you want and what it is you need. It's still very much an evolving thing, but I think coming back to an earlier point that was made is we've just got to try these things and learn from them, and then we'll ultimately come up with things that benefit us the most.
Elon Musk, autonomous driving. How will that affect urban density? Will people continue to move to the cities, sometimes because of transportation costs, limits on fossil fuels? Will autonomous driving change the entire dynamic, and will people start spreading?
Stunned silence.
I think the fundamental reason people come to cities is to be with other people, and that's not going to change. Hopefully, the autonomous vehicle liberates the street from parking. It's not going to liberate the street from cars, right? Manhattan, and if you think about it, so much of the street is taken up by car, but even more importantly by these freight trucks, right, which just offload on the sidewalk. If you suddenly free up all that public space, you can really do something with it. And
So Deloitte, we created a series called Building the Lucky Country series, and the last one we did last year was all about the urbanization of Australia. And it was saying that where we had seen a suburbanization in the 70s and 80s, we're now, and the 90s, we're now seeing the urbanization of our cities. The people are actively coming back into our CBDs. And the reason for that is we want that connection. We want to create, we've talked a lot about experience this morning, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those moments where we got that 24-hour economy. We want to be able to go to the gym in the morning. We want to connect with people. We want to go to the job. We want to be fulfilled. We want to interact with our peers, and then go straight out and have dinner with friends, and go to a movie or go to the show and go to an art theatre, etc. So it's the urbanization that's allowing us to do that, and is allowing us to be able to bring all of those experiences together into one location, and that's what I think we'll continue to see that.